Well, greetings, seniors. This is, of course, what I had in mind when I helped get Chesterton Academy started 12 years ago, that one day I'd be sitting staring into a computer screen at my own face. This is what I had in mind. It's terrible. And I'm sure that when you signed up for the school and you're all just so excited as your parents enrolled you and you had the great prospect of wearing a uniform for 4 years, that this is what you thought it would lead to, is sitting at home looking at my face and wearing your pajamas. Okay, well, anyways, we're going to do 10 sessions together on The Everlasting Man, the great book that Chesterton wrote that is really the whole summing up of your entire education at Chesterton Academy. This is where we put it all together. And other years when we've read this book with the seniors, it's been in the midst of, well, all of their senior chaos, and some of them haven't given it as good a reading as they might. But you don't have those excuses, and so I'm looking forward to you really getting the most out of this book, certainly in contrast to many of your predecessors. The unfortunate thing is that we're not going to be able to discuss it face to face. The way the class is going to be set up is for 9 more classes after this one. You're going to be given a little quiz on the daily reading. It's I don't know how, I can't remember how often times you guys meet. I think 4 times a week. But there'll be an assigned reading for every class. You get a quiz to very short questions, short answers to show that you understand the material. And then there will be 3 more lectures. I'll be giving a lecture in connection with the first part of the book in a couple of days, and then 2 lectures about the second half of the book. One to conclude everything. So it's going to be your daily reading, answering the questions. I'm going to give a couple of talks and 3 more, and then you're going to write a paper. And this is the paper, my friends. This is the paper where you put it all together, just like this book puts it all together. You're going to demonstrate in this paper how something in The Everlasting Man put it all together for you. You're going to pull in something that you read in another class, or maybe in several other classes that you studied, something that sums up all the things that you've studied, and just give me a great summary using this text of your whole Chesterton education. Something that shows integrated curriculum. Something that screams integration. If you have any questions, of course, you can talk to me about that. But while you're reading the book, start thinking about what you're going to write for your final paper. One of those papers will be the essay that is the award winner at the end of the school year and will be published in Gilbert Magazine. We're talking about fame, glory, and immortality. So, your school is called Chesterton Academy because I read this book, The Everlasting Man, on my honeymoon. This was the first Chesterton book that I read. And this is the book that got me all excited, not just about my wife, but about G.K. Chesterton. And as she has said so eloquently, the 3 of us have gotten along very well. So I read this book on my honeymoon, just like everybody else does on their honeymoon. They read. And I was a Baptist at the time. This was long before my conversion. And we went to Rome on our honeymoon. We honeymooned in Rome, as all Baptists do. And I brought The Everlasting Man to read, and my wife was reading Les Miserables, true story. Also, to make the story even more interesting, we were there the day that Pope John Paul II was shot. So it was an eventful honeymoon in many ways. But the main thing that we got out of the honeymoon was this school, because that's what it all led to. So think about that. No, don't think about that while you're reading it. why is this book so influential? This is Chesterton's great work of apologetics. This is how he defends Christianity in the most comprehensive fashion of all of his writings. He really does. He brings in philosophy and history and art, literature, mythology, poetry, sociology, science. It looks like the Chesterton curriculum. Well, you'll find something in this book that somehow brings in what you've been studying for the last 4 years in all the classes. And this was the book that was read by a young atheist named C.S. Lewis, who found that the book totally changed his life. He said it was the first rational defense of Christianity that he'd ever read. C.S. Lewis. So it is a book not without ramifications. Why did he write the book? He wrote it in response to another book by a writer named H.G. Wells. Some of you have heard of H.G. Wells. He's probably one of the leading science fiction writers of all time. He wrote the book The War of the Worlds, The Invisible Man, The Time Machine, really famous books of science fiction. He was a contemporary of Chesterton's. He was a man who, philosophically and, well, obviously theologically, but also just morally, was as different from Chesterton as you could imagine. He would not have agreed with G.K. Chesterton on anything. Atheist, immoral man, socialist, but always kind of protean and changing in his ideas. He never stayed to one idea very long. However, he and G.K. Chesterton were friends. And even though they held debates in print and argued with each other in print, they would spend weekends together socializing and really enjoyed each other's company, even though they were philosophical opponents. It's because Chesterton could get along with his enemies so well. That was one of the reasons why he was so admired and so loved. And at Chesterton's funeral, H.G. Wells went to Frances Chesterton, Chesterton's widow, and said, "If I have any chance of getting into heaven, it's going to be because I was a friend of G.K. Chesterton." So what was the book that H.G. Wells wrote that Chesterton was responding to with this book, Everlasting Man? It was a book called The Outline of History. And H.G. Wells' main thesis in the book, as he tries to just explain all of human history, is he starts out with evolution, that man is just a creature of the muck and just another animal in the zoo. And as we get through the characters of history, along comes Jesus, and Jesus is just another human as well. And Chesterton says that H.G. Wells has written a book where he basically has tried to ignore the main character in the story. And so when Chesterton writes The Everlasting Man, he splits it into two parts. The first part is on the creature called man, and the second part is on the man called Christ. And he first tries to get us to understand that man is not like any other animal, and what are the main events in the history of mankind that led then to that event of Jesus stepping into history, stepping onto the human stage, and how Jesus is simply not like any other man that's ever lived. A complete diametrically opposed thesis to H.G. Wells, that man is truly not just another animal, and Jesus is truly not just another man. And you cannot understand history unless you accept those two really commonsensical ideas, and yet the secular world tries to reject those two ideas. But how does Chesterton go about making the argument? Well, I hope you have your book with you, because I'd like us to look at one little passage together to start us off. And It's on page 15, down at the bottom of page 15. And I'm going to read to you. Even though I have a different cover on my book, it's the same edition. Now, if you don't have this edition, well, then you're screwed. And if you are one of these people who's listening to the book instead of reading it, well, then you're screwed too. But the point is, it's from the introduction. And by the way, if you're going to listen to the book instead of read it, you're still going to have to take notes because you're going to have to answer questions. All right. Bottom of 15. Out of some dark forest, under some ancient dawn, there must come towards us with lumbering yet dancing motions one of the very queerest of the prehistoric creatures. We must see for the first time the strangely small head set on a neck, not only longer, but thicker than itself, as the face of a gargoyle is thrust upon a gutter spout, the one disproportionate crest of hair running along the ridge of that heavy neck like a beard in the wrong place, the feet, each like a club of horn, a solid club of horn, alone amid the feet of so many cattle, so that the true fear is to be found in showing not the cloven, but the uncloven hoof. Okay, let's just stop. What is he describing? What is he describing in that? What animal is he describing? Now that you've thought about it, would you have guessed a horse? He's describing a horse. Let's look at the description again. It is lumbering yet dancing. One of the queerest of the prehistoric creatures. It's got a strangely small head set on a neck that is longer but thicker than itself. The face of a gargoyle, thrust upon a gutter spout. Disproportionate crest of hair running along the ridge of that heavy neck like a beard in the wrong place. The feet each like a solid club of horn, different from the cloven hoofs of the cattle. Now, when I was describing it, I'm going to bet that most of you did not think I was describing a horse. And there's a reason we're doing this exercise, and it's this. How do you describe a horse to someone who's never seen a horse? Or how do you describe a horse to someone who has seen a horse, but you want them to think about it as if they're seeing it for the first time? What would be the strange, striking features of a horse if you've never seen it, or if you have seen it so many times that you've really forgotten how strange the horse looks? That's what Chesterton is trying to do in this book, not with horses, but with Christianity. He says the problem with Christianity when you're trying to defend it or explain it to people is that most people know just about enough of it to get it wrong, or just enough of it that they think they know what Christianity is, but they really don't. Especially those who have rejected Christianity, because they're only reacting to the thing that is closest to them, to the thing that they think they know, and they've really never stepped back and looked at the whole thing, looked at how it came into history and what has happened to it since it came into history. They haven't backed up far enough to see the whole picture. And he gives another example in this chapter of a boy who lives on a mountain, and on the mountain is this figure of a giant, and he's been living on that figure the whole time. And when the first time he travels from home and looks back and sees the mountain, he sees the giant, and he's been living on this giant the whole time. Remember the figure of the white horse on the hillside in the Battle of the White Horse? I've sat on that figure, and you cannot tell that it's a horse when you're sitting right on it. It's when you're miles away that the image is visible. Well, that's the problem with Christianity. People are too close to it to understand. So here, the exercise that Chesterton's going to go through in this book is first get us to understand what a strange creature man is and how he really is different from all the other animals, and how his story is different, and how that story is not the story that we think we know. He wants us to look at the story with new eyes, with a fresh set of eyes, as if we've never seen it before. And then to look at that key event in that story when Jesus comes into the story, and to see it as if we're seeing it for the first time. And especially to the doubter, to the skeptic, so that the skeptic can look at it and say, well, this story really isn't like any other, and maybe they'll see it with new eyes. So that's the plot, and that's what we're going to be. Those are the eyes with which we're going to read this book. So he starts out by saying that he's not going to be writing about it as a defense really so much of the Catholic Church, but as just of the general Christian claim, although he will get into a very Catholic interpretation when the moment comes. But he's not talking about his own conversion, which he calls the chief event of his life. It's not a Catholic apologetic per se, it's a Christian apologetic. The claim that Jesus is the Son of God and is the incarnation. That's what's being defended. Now, let's go back and start read the first couple lines of the book, and then we're going to launch you into reading it yourself, okay? Page 9. There are two ways of getting home, and one of them is to stay there. What a great line, huh? There are two ways of getting home, and one of them is to stay there. What does that mean? Think about it. Think about what that means. I know we're not having a discussion. It's just me talking to the screen and you looking at my face. Especially you're looking at me drinking this tea right now. Earl Grey, hot. But it's sort of the prodigal son story right there, isn't it? Those two guys in the prodigal son story each found their way home. One of them without ever having left, and the other by having to go out around the world. Chesterton wrote a novel, Man Alive, where the main character, Innocent Smith, wants to see what the front of his house looks like. So he walks out the back door and walks all the way around the world in order to see his house from the front. Two ways of getting home. One of them is to stay there. Remember the plot of Orthodoxy, or the allegory at the beginning of Orthodoxy, of the man who gets on a yacht and thinks he's going off to discover a new world, but instead the yacht gets turned around and he comes back to England and thinks he's in a new world, but really he's in the familiar place of England, and he has found his home, and it looks like it's a strange new world to him because he's seeing it with new eyes. Chesterton is basically talking about we have to discover the world we're living in, and we're going to do it either by growing and appreciating that world with a sense of wonder, or having to go away and rediscover it as converts, as that sense of return. It's a wonderful image. You could go on and on about that line right there. In fact, he talks about he says he'd like to write a book about that, but like every book I never wrote, it's by far the best book I've ever written. And yet he has written a form of that book over and over again. Next paragraph, the point of this book is that the next best thing to really being inside Christendom is to be really outside of it. And the particular point of it is that the popular critics of Christianity are not really outside of it. They're on debatable ground in every sense of the term. They are doubtful in their very doubts. Their criticism has taken on a curious tone of a random and illiterate heckling. And most people who criticize the Catholic Church, who criticize the faith, do it with a form of random and illiterate heckling. So this is a very systematic work of apologetics, and he really lays out the case well. And he addresses those who randomly and illiterately heckle us in the faith. So I want you to become familiar with the arguments in the book. I want you for our next session to read chapters 1 and 2. You can finish reading that introduction too, which is very short. Read chapters 1 and 2. There's going to be a little quiz sent to you by Mr. Charmley. Answer the questions, and it's a one-day affair. You have one day to read it and answer the questions. And then we're going to set out the schedule of how we're going to go through it the next 9 classes. I'll come back and give 3 more lectures. In the meantime, there's the daily readings and quizzes to answer. And I want you to enjoy this book and really absorb it. And it will be a pleasure to virtually take you through it. God bless you, and I'll look forward to our sessions together.